Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Pivot, the word of 2020, how to change your business model and find new opportunities always, but even and especially in a crisis. This is actually a reprise of a webinar that CBCA put together at the end of March, if we can all remember back to what the end of March felt like. And we thought this content was even more relevant now here in August. And we wanted to also partner with some groups and really hone in specifically on the music industry. So that's what you're in for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Meredith Badler. I'm the Deputy Director at the CBCA, the Colorado Business Committee for the Arts. In today's webinar, we have partnered with a collaboration of organizations connected through Levitt Pavilion Denver, the Colorado Music Collective, and the National Independent Venue Association. And in just a moment, I'll turn it over to our friend Jesse Witten to talk a little bit about those groups and the work they're doing locally and nationally to support the music industry right now. And then our speaker for this morning is Briana Harris, who is a professional musician, artist manager, entrepreneur, who will, share some tips and tricks and ideas to spark your thinking about how we can be relooking at our music industry, our creative business models, networking, to find some opportunities right now. We know that this pandemic and many other things, the recession we're heading into, is having a really severe impact on our creative industries and music and live performance in particular. So our goal today is to help provide some ideas for you on how to best manage through that and find new opportunities. A few housekeeping items. This is being presented on the Zoom webinar platform. So you, our wonderful attendees who are watching live, you are muted, your video's turned off. That really just helps us focus on the presentation and avoid any distractions. But that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. We are doing this for you. The reason you logged on is you have questions, you have comments on this area. So I want you to take a moment and go to the bottom of your little Zoom screen and find your chat box. There's a little drop down and you can make sure you're chatting to all panelists and attendees. By doing that, your fellow attendees can see what you have to say. So go ahead, change that drop down to all panelists and attendees and introduce yourself. We want to know who's on today. So what's your name, where you're from, what's your connection to this conversation? Introduce yourself in the chat. And then there's also a Q&A function. And that's really where we'd like you to put your questions. That helps us just make sure they don't get lost and we can answer them as we go. There'll be a good amount of time at the end for Q&A. So find your little chat box, make it go to all panelists and all attendees and introduce yourself. Let us know who you are and why you're participating. And then also use that Q&A function to send questions. We are recording today's presentation as well, and it will be posted on CBCA's YouTube page and on our website in the next couple of days. I think those were all of my housekeeping items. I'm going to turn it over to Jesse to talk a little bit about Levitt and NEVA and what they're doing for the music industry.
All these organizations coming together today. Thanks for having me and putting this conversation on because, wow, things were different in March, weren't they? We just had no idea quite how much we had to pivot at the time, and now it's just a radically different world. So we are in partnership with NEVA, that's the National Independent Venue Association, that formed because we realized we needed a collective voice for these independent organizations that are responsible for harboring creative culture in our different areas. In Colorado alone, we have 69 members of NEVA, so we all work together with Colorado's cultural interests in mind, and we also work as a greater collective with nearly 2,000 members, I think, at this point. And our big initiative right now is fighting for support, because early on in the pandemic, when we asked our collective members what things would look like for them 6 months in if we didn't get support, if we continued to have to shut down, because our entire industry is based on the idea of collecting people and bringing them together. Social distancing is completely counter to our values. It was discovered that about 90% of venues were at risk of closing within 6 months if they didn't get support. So right now, our big initiative is Save Our Stages. It's asking our representatives to support the Save Our Stages Act. And we're asking anyone who loves music, participates in music, wants to see its survival, to support this as well at saveourstages.org. So that's what we're working on with NEVA right now. For CMC, this is a collective. This is the Colorado Music Collective, and we've been a voice for networking and education for musicians and anyone interested in the music industry here in Colorado for years, and we've laid dormant for a little bit, but the need is pretty great right now. We got some dire numbers from Denver Post the other day saying that Denver has lost about half of its music industry jobs and about over $200 million in lost revenue. So we really do need to come together and continue these conversations. So we hope to have more discussions like this through CMC and partnerships like this. As far as Levitt Pavilion Denver, we are one of those venues that's been hit hard from the pandemic and its effects. We've had to close for the season, which is pretty heartbreaking. When you talk about pivot, we pivoted from one idea to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, until finally it became really clear that we just needed to fully commit to the pivot and keep it online and keep these discussions alive in a different space. So here we are. Right now, Levitt Pavilion Denver has 2 live music experiences a week, Monday and Wednesday night at 6 p.m. on our Facebook page in partnership with Denver 7. So you can watch those performances on our Facebook page or Denver 7's Facebook page. And it has been a really nice way to continue to see live music on a regular basis, but nothing will replace live music necessarily. So that's what these 3 orgs are doing, and really happy to be here. Thankful for Bree and CBCA.
Thank you. Thanks, Jesse. You guys are doing such wonderful work. We threw the Save Our Stages. I think I threw the Save the Stages URL in the chat. I may have typed it wrong. You'll correct me. All right. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we have with us, joining us from beautiful Greeley, Colorado, is Briana Harris, who I mentioned is a professional musician. She plays saxophone and other instruments in local bands. She is an artist manager. She's an entrepreneur. She's a marketer. We're a big fan. And you know, this is meant to give you some ideas on the word of 2020, how to pivot your work in the music industry right now and going forward. So Jesse and I will go dark. We'll keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A. But take it away, Bree.
All right. So thank you guys so much for attending. Excited to talk to you today, and I am going to start sharing my screen. So here we go. Cool. It's up there. We can all see it. All right. So like has been mentioned multiple times, the theme of today's presentation is pivot. Changing business models and finding new opportunities, even in crisis. If you're tired of that word after 5 months, 6 months in this already, then I accept that, and that's fine. But we're, here today to talk about not necessarily throwing like a silver lining on what's a very real crisis happening, not only as a global pandemic, but specifically in our industry and music, but to try and put our heads together and, find some new ideas, find some new opportunities, and, salvage this time however we can. So we will get started. Look forward to hearing your questions as well. Here we go. There we go. All right, so up front, some disclaimers about this this time. And I wrote this back in March, but I think it still applies nowadays as well. This isn't an artist retreat. If you're one of the people, I know this doesn't apply to everyone, who finds yourself with a little bit more time these days, don't feel bad if you are feeling unmotivated, unproductive, kind of scattered. It's a global pandemic. It's not an artist retreat. It's okay if you feel scared, unmotivated, uncertain during this time period. And all of the advice we're going to talk about today is given as a lower priority than handling your safety and your well-being, as well as the safety and well-being of your friends, your family, and your community. So again, just here to offer things I hope are helpful, but not a directive to lean harder into like hustle culture or anything like that. So a little bit about me. I am a saxophonist by trade. Also do some vocal work, a little bit of other, occasionally keyboards, writing songs, music composition. I work as an artist manager as well for multidisciplinary creatives, not just in the music industry. I'm fully self-employed, own my own business. For my own band, I've been a tour manager, I've been a booking agent, occasionally a publicist. I do some arts marketing work, and I'm also a person who's working in an industry that has totally collapsed, as we all know. So a little bit about me as well. I own and manage and play in a 9-piece funk and soul band. The name of that band is The Burrows, which a 9-piece, loud, sweaty, high energy funk and soul band is probably exactly the wrong model right now that's viable as far as live performance goes, although we've had a couple things here and there this summer. And so thinking about how to sort of, be creative about how to still keep creating music and interacting has been top of mind for us for sure, as I'm sure it is for all of the other industry pros on this call. So given that context, I want to talk a little bit about, how we can start thinking about multiple income streams, how we can start thinking about, thinking outside the box of like what our original business model might be for, either ourselves as individuals, if you're an individual creator or business owner, or if you're working in the context of a venue or production company. I come at this definitely from sort of the individual creative mindset, but hope I have some stuff that's helpful from an organizational perspective as well. So talking about multiple income streams. Reasons to think about having multiple income streams. Number one, and especially if you are an individual creative, it's good to be able to generate revenue without having to physically be everywhere. Back in the old times, the before times, especially in music, when we're thinking about touring and performance, which are great and are was a primary way for especially performing musicians to make money, there is kind of an upper limit on what you can do with that because you can't clone yourself and physically be multiple places all at once. Honestly, now in this new digital world, you kind of can. You can create content that's going out multiple places that maybe is generating some revenue. So that's always kind of been a limit on individual musicians and performing musicians, and having multiple income streams that bring you some kind of passive revenue is just helpful to think about at any time, but especially right now. Another thing is being able to engage with your audience year round, particularly if you're a semi-seasonal business, again, in sort of a normal, time period and cycle. A lot of, Colorado has a very seasonal summer music festival season, with a lot of outdoor events, a lot of municipal groups presenting, different city-sponsored concerts and things. But then a lot of that activity definitely slows down in the winter and early spring. Kind of vice versa, I know a lot of indoor venues, summer might not really be typically their high season, and then they do more business in maybe the fall and winter. So now, when a lot of that stuff isn't open at all, how are there ways we can kind of take advantage of that and engage with an audience all the time and create things that are kind of constantly communicating with them? And then another reason for just thinking about multiple income streams in general is to life-proof and crisis-proof your livelihood so you don't have all your eggs in one basket. I think one thing I want to talk about a lot today is, besides finding ourselves with the specific challenges of the pandemic we have right now, is also thinking about the ways that traditionally the music industry has not served everyone. There's things about it that have limited participation for certain groups of people. It's been historically pretty challenging for both performers and industry pros to incorporate things like family life, just because of the working hours, the workload in general, the idea of being on the road all of the time. And I think there's a real opportunity right now as we both create new, maybe kind of temporary income streams, but also think about the way we want to shape the industry long term, about how we can make it more compatible with more people's livelihoods and lives outside of work. So, some simple, easy ways to kind of start something without totally reinventing the wheel, totally launching a new business model. And just a few ideas here. So if you are an individual musician, or if you're a venue that has merchandise, any physical product that you already have, obviously, like, just put it online, make it available for shipping. Probably everyone has done that by this point, this far into the pandemic, but if you haven't, take that step and at least have a little bit of passive income that's coming in. Also begin offering, maybe it's commissioned work or like kind of targeted consulting. One really creative way I've seen musicians do this, besides just kind of the general free, available to everyone live stream model, is doing sort of virtual living room concerts. So having a limited cap private concert that you can have, a small group of people sign in. The musician can make it really personalized. They can take requests and they can kind of build a performance specific to that small audience. And because of that personal connection and customized product, probably charge a more premium price for it. So that's sort of in the virtual event space. I could totally see a venue, offering kind of like a similar virtual event kind of idea. I could see venues and production companies who have all of this expertise about event presentation, promotion, marketing, taking some of that expertise and bringing it to all of these other clients now who are getting into the event space maybe for the first time, particularly like municipal clients who are now presenting a bunch of things online. Where is your expertise valuable that maybe you haven't looked before? If you are someone who's offered any kind of in-person engagement or workshop content, maybe you do a little bit of work in the music education space, anything that you already have developed, go ahead and convert it into like an online curriculum or online resources. And maybe that's something that you're able to charge a little bit for, or maybe it's something that you just are able to offer for free at first and kind of engage your audience. And that's just thinking about things you already have in your back pocket that you can convert to an online or virtual format. And then also take the step of making your work available on all monetized platforms. Maybe it's not a great fit everywhere, but at least try and go down, go down the rabbit hole and make sure that you're taking advantage of putting content everywhere that you can monetize it a little bit. So if you have enough subscribers on a YouTube channel, make sure you're taking the steps to monetize that. Facebook now has the option on its events where you can monetize virtual events in platform. Obviously, you can also set that up outside the platform. So just all of that to kind of think about. Cool. All right, so thinking about finding new clients, especially when your industry has collapsed. And I also want to say here too that I think particularly you guys attending from the venue side, I really, really feel for you. And I know this is such a challenging time. You guys probably have the shortest end of the stick in all of this, in that you have the most overhead with having physical spaces and buildings and rents or mortgages to pay, and the most amount of restrictions. And it might feel like also the least amount of opportunity. So I really feel for you, and there might be a limited amount of work you can do sort of in the venue space, but I hope there's still a couple ideas to pull from this. So I believed in this idea before the pandemic, and I still really believe in it now, but we have to get over this idea that we are, like, our audience is just other artists or other musicians. It is very important to build community with other musicians and music industry connections, but it's unlikely that our inner circle has the resources to pay our bills right now. And so I want us to think about, like, who's willing to pay for what we have to offer, and how can we make it valuable enough that they will? And I think this is a really good guiding principle even outside of the music industry. You know, it's interesting. I have a visual artist client who honestly has been working probably more than ever during this time period, which is due to really great work that he does. But almost, I would say, like 90% of his work is business to business clients. He's not doing a ton of individual commissions to individuals. He's not doing just tons of like artist workshops to other artists, but there's corporate clients, municipal clients, organizations that do have budgets to pay for creative work right now. And I think that's still true in music as well, to an extent. So what I like to think about is who has more money than they have time right now. And some of this is like, you know, take all of this with a grain of salt, but just thinking about the populations who like still are working, you know, might even be working overtime and have, as far as the resources of time and money, have a little bit more money than they have time. So maybe some healthcare professionals, you know, maybe especially like healthcare businesses or hospitals that might be looking for, you know, that might be looking for extra programming or help. Some working parents, as we're headed back into a very weird looking fall school semester, I think this is a truly mixed bag. And obviously there's a lot of things to talk about as far as, you know, access to resources and equity in education. However, I do think there are a lot of working parents who do have some resources and are facing, you know, maybe totally remote school or really limited extracurricular activities at school that, you know, creatives can come in and fill that space. Some public servants, you know, again, like some city professionals, some people working in local governments who are kind of addressing all of these different issues. And then also some online businesses and startups. I know in our industry, it's kind of the assumption that everyone's business is, you know, down revenue-wise based on normal times, but there's definitely some corporate clients, startups, digital businesses who have business way, way up and might really have a need, particularly for creative content, creative consulting, virtual event assistance and production, all of these needs that the music industry has expertise in. And then the other thing I like to think about is actually solving a specific problem that some of these populations have. So rather than pitching like a broad set of skills, identify a specific need that a client or industry has, develop some kind of solution to meet that need, and pitch that specific solution rather than broad skills. So let's say, just as an example, we're thinking about, like someone who comes from a background of live sound production. And so you might say like, hey, I'm a sound engineer, normally work in a venue. That venue's closed for the foreseeable future. And I'm not really, but I'm here with my sound engineer skills, like happy to help someone. The average person you're going to come in contact with isn't really going to know what to do with that. But if you see the specific problem that, well, hey, more people than ever are setting up some kind of home audio recording technology. Maybe they're ordering something from Sweetwater for like the first time ever. They're getting it to their house. They're trying to hook it up with their technology. And it's brand new to them. Maybe the specific problem you can solve is helping them quickly and efficiently set up that gear and consult on the best way to set it up. So maybe what you can pitch is becoming a home recording consultant. Do little mini consults, hop on a Zoom call with someone, help them troubleshoot their equipment, and suddenly, this person who normally works in an office or corporate client is, they're able to really easily set up home recording gear. So that's just one example. Again, thinking about like what specific problems exist and how you can kind of take your skills and pitch it to solve those issues for people. Another thing to think about is how you can reconnect with old clients, which I think in a lot of ways is a more helpful place to start than brainstorming something that's totally brand new, because you already have a relationship with people, and you've already built some kind of trust. So maybe there's something you can offer those people. So explore old leads. Again, this is coming from kind of an individual perspective, but if you're, if you're a venue, you could think about like exploring, reaching out to a particular artist who like may have skipped on your venue in the past, but maybe they can do a virtual event with you. So what do you have time to do now that you said no to before, or what do you have capacity to do now that you said no to before? Re-engage with those people, like reach out, give a reintroduction of who you are and maybe what your work looks like right now, which could be really different than what it's been in the past. If there's something new you're doing and trying, something new you're offering, and lead with some kind of opportunity. So rather than being like, hey, it's a really, like we all are aware that it's a tough time for creative industries at large, the music industry specifically, rather than being like, hey, I'm in a really tough spot, hoping you can hire me to do this, this, or that. Lead with an opportunity, again, that solves a specific problem. Hey, I'm offering this, like, I'm now offering a 12-week, music production workshop for high school students. And I know you're a working parent who suddenly your kid, all of their extracurricular activities are canceled. Like, I'd love to give you early access to this first group I'm running. I think it'll be really fun. It's going to be easy for your kid to engage from home. Here's exactly how it's going to work. Again, solving a specific problem. And then also think about reconnecting with old networks that you have. And the music industry is such an amazingly connected, first of all, it's pretty small overall. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, just brainstorming some different groups, professional organizations, entities, even like the Colorado Music Collective. If you have audience mailing lists, this could be a really good time to reconnect with them. And whether you're using that to generate revenue or not, I think there's a lot of work you can do as far as long-term audience engagement, understanding who is in your audience, what they might want in the future. Again, ticket buyers kind of also in that umbrella. College friends or networks. If you're a musician, tour contacts, virtual communities that are online. Again, just kind of thinking about who you might not have had time to engage with on a personal level, and how can you reach out? And even, again, if the conversation doesn't immediately lead to some kind of revenue generation, maybe it's building a really important bridge that's going to serve you well headed into the future. All right, so thinking about pitching new skills. And I just want to encourage everyone to, like, I am such a big cheerleader for the idea that musicians and music industry professionals are these amazing, multifaceted, really flexible, responsive creatives. And even if, like, your main work has been working production in a venue for years, I do believe that, like, there are, like, so many other things you're qualified and ready to do, and, like, to take that skill set and bring it to a new audience. And I just want to be really encouraging of that, not from a, you got to go out there and do more work kind of perspective, but just to encourage you to try new things, even if they feel scary or uncomfortable or brand new. So where I like to start in this is thinking about adjacent industries. What's kind of like one step on the ladder, up or down, or, like, you know, just like a few degrees left or right of what you're already working in. And so a couple of ideas here. If you normally do live educational workshops in music education, maybe you can pivot that into virtual curriculum development, something that's accessible for a bunch of audiences and students and parents now working online. If you work in live production, maybe now you can get into home sound mixing, video editing as well. I'm sure a lot of you guys are already doing that for sure. If you have event expertise, which any promoter, venue, you know, industry staff, you all do, maybe you can pivot to some kind of virtual assistant work, some kind of, you know, virtual event consultation for groups that are brand new to hosting events at all. I think there's definitely a lot of municipal clients, public servants in that boat who, like, their expertise is not necessarily in marketing and virtual events, and music industry has a ton of expertise in the event area. And so thinking about this, think about what your minimum viable product is, which is just a version of your product or service with, like, just enough features to satisfy early customers, give you some feedback, and allow you to keep developing it. So rather than thinking, hey, I'm going to pivot to some kind of online workshops, I need to build out a whole, 4 months worth of workshops, and I need to launch this, like, totally beautiful website that's completely done, and I need my plans A through Z complete. What's, like, one of those that you can do, that you can get launched in a couple weeks, that hardly costs you anything, that's, like, really clear what you're offering, that you can get out the door, and that you can also easily test and modify? Because I think the problem when we think about exploring new industries or pivoting or trying something new is thinking that we have to have it, like, 100% of the ship built before we sail out into those open waters. And there's a lot of it that we can kind of build along the way. And also, you might be better served, rather than assuming that at the start exactly what people need, testing stuff out and having something that's really flexible, that then if part of it takes off, you can really pursue that lead. So again, feel like you can start somewhere easy. What's kind of the lowest hanging fruit that you can go after? And also trust the broad experience that you have. Keep in mind that literally all of us in the music industry, but also all of humanity in general, are going through something that's new right now. This is my first global pandemic. I think that's definitely true for everyone else as well. So applying that to your work, and, you know, maybe new parts of the industry. Don't worry if you've never done whatever exact thing you're pursuing before. Again, people are going to hire you or want to work with you because of their personal connections to you first. So lean on those rather than feeling like you have to make dozens of cold calls or cold emails. Start with who you know, start with who you have relationships and trust built with. And your broad knowledge of your field is going to guide you through these new ventures. So again, I just want you to feel really encouraged and empowered that, you know, all of these skills that you've spent probably decades investing in and building, they're still applicable even if you can't do your specific thing right now. You can apply that to learning any new piece of technology or skill. I think one of the most, you know, kind of disheartening things right now about working in music is that, you know, none of us get into music because we feel like we're going to make a ton of money. Like pretty much everyone that I've ever met involved, from promoters to venues to performers to production crew, are in it because they love music. And right now, in a lot of ways, like we can't do the thing that we love, which particularly if we're talking about live performance. And so it's very easy, you know, I really feel this as someone who's like an instrumentalist primarily, plays saxophone, which, you know, still there's, you know, sort of debatable some restrictions on whether that's even a safe instrument to play around people right now. It's very easy to feel like, oh, did I waste like 20 years of my life learning this very niche skill? Is there anything else I can do? But keep in mind that, like you can take the skills, like the broad skills that you've built on that, in that specific niche, and apply them to all of these other places. The idea of like practicing and honing a craft, the idea of creatively collaborating with teams, the idea of understanding how to explain or pitch a creative project to a broader audience, all of these things. And then the second thing I also want to say in that area is that, just as kind of a word of encouragement as well, music itself has survived so much. Like it's always been with us through all kinds of global crises. It's going to continue to be with us after this. I think there's definitely parts of the industry that are going to look different, but the music is going to make it, even if it looks different and evolves. All right, so moving on, thinking about building out some content. So this is really an area that if you are in a part of the industry where you have, you know, maybe a little bit more time than client work right now, if you have that privilege, this is an area to think about investing in. So really all artists, and I would argue now, also all venues, all industry professionals run some kind of mini content company. And so thinking about like what you can create, what's worth spending your time on creating, what's the best fit for your audience? Like where is your audience? Are they likely to consume a video format or, you know, a long form written blog or email newsletter, anything like that? And what can you make right now? Again, not totally reinventing the wheel, not having to go back to school and get a brand new degree or spend all this time. What can you make right now with the tools you already have? I also want to encourage you that right now is the time to try something, your weirdest idea that you've never had time to invest in. And so also on a personal note, like my 9-piece funk and soul band earlier this summer ended up putting together a full variety show telethon online, which we had never done before. But we had just enough video production experience, content generation experience that we were able to pull it together. We lined up like 10 different artists who all submitted videos. We made it feel a little bit more elevated and had a specific artistic direction beyond, just a standard live stream. And we really built it around feeling like an old school, videothon, telethon. And we were able to raise actually like almost $10,000 for putting musical instruments in schools. It was a pretty weird idea that we just went and ran with, and we never would have had time to do outside of this season. So channels to leverage. I mean, you guys already know about all this, like obviously your website. If you don't have a website for your work, there's a lot of different ways to get something launched pretty quickly and pretty cheaply. Squarespace is great. Wix is really easy to use. Yes, you can use WordPress as well, but some of those other ones are a little bit more, drag and drop, ready to go tools. Obviously, social media. Again, as someone who's worked in arts marketing and social media, I would encourage you to use that to the extent that it feels sustainable and mentally healthy for you, and maybe not feel like you have to be on all channels all the time, but just think about where your audience is most likely to be. And also your email newsletter, which if you work in a venue, or anything with an audience, hopefully you already have a pretty robust list. That's likely to be a much more engaged audience than the general social media population, but you'll be the experts in what's going to work best for you. And thinking about engagement with whoever you're interacting with. So how can you turn people who are kind of casually interacting with you into long-time patrons, supporters, people who are kind of going to be on your team for the long haul? So at this top of the funnel, we think about people who might engage with you or your work on social media, or maybe they do a Google search and they find out a little bit about who you are and what you do. At this tier 2, maybe they're digging into, like they're actually headed to your website, they're reading resources or blog posts that you have, they've joined your email newsletter and they're opening it, which if you are using any sort of mailing list tool, you should be able to see who's most engaged with that content. Further down the funnel, you have people who maybe you're converting to, they're paying for a little bit of premium content. Maybe they're occasionally like paying to access something that's behind a paywall. Maybe they've joined a Patreon if you have that set up. Or maybe even beyond that, like you've converted them to paying for some kind of targeted one-on-one consultations. And then this tier 4 is like people beyond that who are willing to sustain support that outlasts this temporary short-term crisis period and are going to be really interested in what you're doing long-term. So not everyone is going to be your core audience. Sometimes when I talk to artists and ask them like, well, who's your audience for this? And they're like, well, we really want, or I especially talk to event presenters, like, who do you want to attend this event? And you're like, well, we want everyone to attend it. And that is almost never the right answer. Everything is not going to be for everybody. Again, think about where you're investing most of your time with your most engaged audience. And again, like who's been engaged with you for a long time, that you might be able to really invest time in building stronger relationships right now to where they're going to be interested in what you're doing well beyond this pandemic. And then when all else fails, when you don't really have a viable way maybe to launch a new product or service or make revenue, plan ahead for what you want the future to look like. So maybe this looks like doing a lot of market research. I would also say in that category, like thinking about audience development long-term, are the questions you can ask your audience about, what they've liked in the past, what they'd like to see in the future. I would really argue that a lot of the traditional music industry leaves out a ton of potential audience members just due to things like format, show times, accessibility, sometimes pricing, sometimes promotion. So what can you do right now to think about like some of those problems in a different way? Also building more robust admin and systems. So again, all those tasks that you're like, oh man, this is a mess. And if I ever have time, I'll do it. Now's the time to kind of address some of that stuff. Can you build a more streamlined, event platform? Can you clean up your database of press contacts? Can you, put together a production run sheet that's really streamlined, anything like that. Content development as well. It's a good thing to invest some time in right now. And then especially for individual creatives, thinking about your creative output. Is there songwriting you can do? Is there experiments with new technology or instruments, or some kind of creative channel? Can you just kind of put in the time, a little bit of that quote unquote, like 10,000 hours to expertise, trying something new and building out some new skills there as well. So a few free and low cost resources. You guys are a savvy audience, so I assume you probably know about a lot of these already. Lynda.com has a lot of courses through most of our public libraries. Everything from graphic design to business courses to kind of any skill you might want to learn. Skillshare is also a pretty low cost subscription model to lots of e-courses. Again, almost anything you could want to learn. Canva.com offers free design tools. If you are suddenly in the boat where, maybe you are making a lot of content for the first time and need just some basic graphic design, it's great. It's actually what I built this presentation on. Later.com is a social media scheduling tool as well. So again, if you're suddenly working as your own social media marketer and content creator, admin person, it's nice to have a few of these tools in your back pocket. And then here's kind of my final slide. Just ways to kind of connect with me. I have a website. I'm on Facebook on an individual page. I'm on Instagram on an individual page as well, but I engage there quite a lot. So please give me a follow, shoot me an email if you'd like, send me a message. I'm happy to talk with you guys. And with that, I think I'd like to stop screen sharing and answer some of the questions which are hard for me to see right here. So I'll stop sharing. And
I'm gonna pop up here too. Thanks, Bree. That was awesome. I love the way that you sparked so many ideas at least for me, of like, oh, that's a skill people have. That's an avenue they could take. So for those still watching with us live, feel free to send your questions or comments into the chat or the Q&A. There were a few that I wanted to just touch on. One thing that I know folks are really struggling with is how to communicate their value in a financial sense and monetizing some of their opportunities. Do you have any tips or suggestions for how to both logistically make that really easy for people, but also just how to communicate their value?
Yeah, I have a few ideas on that. First of all, I also want to say as a disclaimer that I don't want anyone to walk away from this feeling like guilt about what you are or aren't doing. I think the elephant in the room is this is not any of your guys' fault. And with much more robust government support and safety nets, we maybe wouldn't be having this exact conversation. So again, hopefully this stuff is helpful and doesn't feel like a homework assignment. But thinking about communicating value, particularly if you're someone who, maybe you've always worked within a team or under an organization or in a venue, and suddenly you're facing that's not a viable pathway right now, and you are trying to pitch stuff as an individual freelancer or self-employed person and find opportunities. Number one, just having some kind of public platform for your work. And I say that really loosely, it could be something as formal as a website. It could just be like some kind of personal social media presence. Again, I think sometimes the easiest way for people to get started like talking about themselves and their work is to reach out to existing contacts and relationships rather than feeling like, oh, hey, I got to go out into like the wide digital world and tell people strangers I've never met that I'm offering this. Again, like think about who do you have good relationships with? Like if you worked sound or production in a venue, like do you have contacts who are like, hey, just wanted to reach out and say like I've been experimenting with doing some home video production. Like here's some things that I'm doing I think are unique based on what I've seen. And I'd love to have a conversation about if this is a need you have, let's talk about it. And, that's a good place to start. Like, you don't have to go in swinging super hard. Like, you don't have to be like, here's my package pricing. And like, I think if you're really thinking about contacts you already have that have a problem that you specifically can solve, that connection is going to feel authentic. I know for me at the start of this pandemic, like I was, my business was kind of at a point where I was like thinking about exiting some contract work with an arts organization that was happening. And, of course, like my summer was going to be full of performing and touring, and that's not really happening. So almost immediately I reached out to them and I was like, hey, I'd love to keep doing this contract work, but like one thing that almost immediately is going to be a need is sifting through all of these resources for creatives on government support, food, shelter, safety resources, and digesting it and putting it into easy to understand, like blog, email, newsletter, social media communications. So it's like, that's something I can do. Like, let me know if you want me to proceed with that. I think that would be a good use of my time. So maybe that was an authentic connection. It's not like I was approaching someone cold and pitching someone brand new. I was taking a relationship I already had, and just offering to solve a problem that I saw coming down the pipeline. So hopefully that's helpful. And just also I encourage people to I think the reason community is so important around these things is to talk with other creatives doing similar work and literally just ask them like, hey, I see you do, like, what are you charging for this? Like, hey, I saw you got this client contract. Like, what was that like? How did you get that? Like, what, how did you make that introduction? Also asking people you trust and have good relationships with to make introductions for you as well, is huge too. Like, don't feel like that's off limits. Like use your network. Don't be ashamed of like asking for connections and help. And yeah.
I think those are such wonderful comments and suggestions. And I think just even the groups that have come together here today are all about providing connections and resource sharing. And I know us at CBCA, obviously, Jesse and the team at Levitt and Neva and the Colorado Music Collective, that is their purpose as well. So use the resources available. I noticed someone threw something up in the chat that I just wanted to touch on, was that, we can't forget that we need to fight for better societal safety nets, which frequently save just as many artists as non-artists.
Absolutely.
And I think there are so many municipal grants and loan funds and relief funds that on the surface may not seem that they're for the arts, but you all are small business owners and entrepreneurs. You just happen to work in the creative industries. And so many of those actually are available to you right now. I know CBCA has a long list on our website. Many of the creative districts are promoting these kind of resources. So there may be more sort of stopgap support or trainings like this that are available to you that may not immediately say, this is for you because you're a venue owner or a musician.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say like also that stuff is for you even if you run some kind of business that doesn't really have a lot of overhead. Like as a self-employed person, I like had very minimal, I actually took a PPP loan early in this process, just as an individual. And really my only expense is like my own payroll. I don't have employees. I don't have rent to pay. But that's like, don't feel any guilt about accessing that if you are an individual creative or run a solo enterprise. Even if like what you do doesn't maybe look like what we think of as small business, which often I think what comes to mind is like, oh, a storefront and like a physical location. Those, I mean, again, like I feel such empathy for venues and the situations because I think they're in the hardest situation right now because they do have the most overhead and expenses and kind of the hardest struggle right now. But yeah, if you're a solo artist, like, yeah, you are a small business, like own it.
We had a great question that came into the Q&A from Christopher, who I believe is a musician.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide which social channels to invest your content and time into?
So that's a great question. And I think, so number one, thinking about like what's actually manageable for you as an individual, unless it's something you have the resources and privilege to hire out, which is great if you do. I like to start with like investing real time and energy into maybe one or two that's the best fit for your audience. So thinking about the demographics of the different platforms, I mean, Facebook's definitely skews older, particularly now. Instagram is probably like millennial-ish, as the biggest audience. TikTok is a huge new platform with probably the biggest opportunity for organic growth right now. But if you don't feel like your audience is under 25 years old, like don't feel like you have to necessarily spend tons of time there. Although I did been working with an artist recently who basically had this like huge viral hit, and told me that major record labels basically don't even view Facebook metrics and are looking at TikTok, and sometimes Instagram. Weird side note, that no pressure to like go on there and make something happen. But honestly, social media like can be such a pain in the butt. And I think like, remember number one, that it is work. It's not like free time, playtime. It's work, and it like definitely feels like work. And it's valuable work if you're doing it well. So do what feels manageable and natural to you. Maybe start with like where you find yourself organically spending the most time and like feels most natural for you to engage. And then like maybe when you have a good plan and kind of workflow together on one or two of those channels, think about expanding to other ones. But yeah, and I'd also think about the type of content you do too. I mean, really all of the channels have good video options now. But particularly it's like, oh, I'm like primarily doing long form video, like maybe YouTube is your place to go. If you're doing like more educational kind of content, like Instagram stories can be really great for that. Or the feed, or like the IGTV tool. So yeah, think about where your audience is, pick one, really invest time and energy into doing it well, and only then think about expanding into other channels.
Super, thank you. Well, we're just about at time. I don't know if Jesse, if you want to pop back on. Everyone is muted, so I'll applaud Bri for sharing her time and ideas and inspiration. Hopefully you all found this helpful. As I mentioned, CBCA is here as a resource. I know Jessie threw her email in the chat. Levitt would love to be a resource, particularly for musicians if you have classes or services or are looking for resources specific to the music industry. They are here to help you. CBCA has been doing webinars like this, some of them way more technical on budgeting and copyright issues, some of them more sort of inspirational like this. All of our webinars are posted on our YouTube channel as well as on our website under our Advancing Creatives program, which is supported by the Kenneth King Foundation. We're very grateful for that. So please stay in touch with us. We are here to support you and support arts through it all. So with that, everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again, Bree. Thank you to Levitt and the Music Collective and Neva. Have a good rest of your day.